If you've been on the internet long enough, you might have caught a glimpse of a peculiar character, an android sporting a white bob, black eye coverings, and a dress that does not look like it should ever be used in a combat scenario. Who is this character? This character is 2B, the protagonist of the fantastical story of 2017's action JRPG, Nier Automata, a character known for her cold and nonchalant attitude, and her prowess as a fighting machine on the battlefield. Despite that, to say that she is the protagonist of Nier Automata would be a flat-out lie. For those who have never played the game before, it would seem that this absolute girl boss should be the protagonist, considering that most marketing focuses on her as a playable character, and the fact that fellow android 9S plays a very sidekick role within the story. Those who have played the game will tell you that this is simply not true, and that is because the story of Nier Automata does not only center on 2B, but rather also on her companion 9S and the mysterious android A2. In fact, the game needs 3 different playthroughs to complete the story of Automata in its entirety, with each playthrough granting players access to both 9S and A2 as playable characters, making 2B actually one of 3 playable characters within the game. But why do you need 3 different playthroughs? That's because Nier Automata has a total of 26 endings, labeled from A to Z, which players need to collect for the achievement Transcendent Being. But this isn't the reason for 3 playthroughs, since most of those endings are gag endings obtained by player actions that deviate from the objective or by achieving a certain goal. The real reason for 3 different playthroughs is because of the endings that do matter, which are endings A, B, C, D, and E, with ending E being the so-called true ending of the game itself. And while there are 5 endings, these aren't actually alternative endings like in a visual novel, but rather each ending corresponds to a different character perspective during the events of the game. The overall storytelling structure in Nier is one based in routes, playthroughs that lead towards a specific ending, for example the playthrough leading to ending A being named as Route A. With each different playthrough, players are able to experience both the story and the world of Nier through the unique perspective of their respective characters, which is represented through their individual personalities, experiences during the story, and also unique side missions only found through their respective routes. It is because of this structure that the story is so memorable. It invites players to enter the world of Nier Automata one route at a time, using each character's perspective to explore different themes that, while shared between routes, are very distinctive based on the character. Leveraging a player's potential for an omniscient perspective, we are slowly introduced to this war-torn world. Whether or not a player has pre-existing knowledge of Nier or Drakengard's lore makes no difference, with the story of Automata being self-contained and built through the story structure. In this video, I want to explore how these individual layers and perspectives work, how the same story can be experienced differently by these characters, and how each ending, each theme, and each playthrough ultimately helps to create the story that makes Automata iconic. Additionally, I want to preface that this is an analysis based on the game itself, meaning that other mediums like novels or the version 1.1a anime from Studio Trigger won't be discussed here. It also means that this video will contain heavy spoilers for pretty much the whole game. While I won't go into every single story beat in detail, certain important plot points will be discussed as well as the various side missions to flesh out these differences between different routes. With that in mind, let us dive into Nier Automata's beautifully intertwining layers and how each of the routes and characters help to build upon its narrative. While Nier Automata stems from an alternate ending within the Drakengard series, the actual story of Nier Automata is never reliant on previous titles. Even its direct predecessor, Nier or Nier Replicant, served as a historical basis of different characters, conflicts, and set pieces, but are never directly tied to the sequel with the exception of the character Emil or perhaps the characters Popula and Devila. Automata takes place during the 14th Machine War, millennia into the future of where the original Nier left off, and far removed from the characters who once traversed this earth. As the name suggests, the Machine War is an ongoing conflict between 2 factions, the machine lifeforms and the androids. Despite what it appears on the surface, this war is a proxy war, one that arose from an initial alien invasion almost 7,000 years before, with the aliens using machine lifeforms as a weapon of choice, while humanity steadily developed many advanced androids to fight them, with the latest line of androids being called YorHa androids. 7,000 years on, these 2 forces are still stuck in a deadlock. The aliens have gone underground, likely into hiding, while the remnants of humanity have escaped to live on the moon, allowing for the full war to play out before hopefully returning to the green home world. With none of their original creators on the surface, both factions fight an almost infinite conflict, reaching a stalemate with the machine lifeforms being unable to conquer more than 80% of Earth, and the androids finding difficulty in taking any territory back. With the latest generation of YorHa models, the androids seek to make another attempt of taking back territory from the machine lifeforms. Armed with advanced flight suits and the spaceborne deployment station called the Bunker, androids like 2B are sent down to Earth on missions, called descent operations, in the hope that one day this war can finally be won. And this is where we begin our first story, with 2B's mission on the 243rd descent operation. In Route A, we follow 2B and a squad of YorHa units as they are en route to the abandoned factory. As part of their mission objective, 2B and Co. are tasked with finding a Goliath-class machine, which are advanced machines that are more dangerous than the usual soldiers. When 2B and her team arrive down on Earth in their flight units, things quickly take a turn for the worse as an unseen force picks up each of the incoming androids one by one, with 2B forced to crash into the abandoned factory itself, forcing both 2B and the player to dive headfirst into the action, and to take up arms against the legions of machines. As she fends off against several machines, 2B is ambushed by Marks, a gigantic machine arm that attacks with its large saw. After successfully dodging the arm and chipping away at the saw's teeth, 2B is successful in defeating it, with an unseen force sending a wave of missiles to fully demolish that enemy. This unseen force is revealed to be 9S, a scouting unit sent to support 2B at the factory. When 9S asks whether Marks is the target, 2B suggests otherwise, with Marks being only a facet of the factory's defense system, with further investigation needed as she heads deeper into the factory. Despite the ill-fated opening act, Route A acts as an introductory route to the story of Automata, presenting its world to the players for the first time before subsequent playthroughs. Within the first chapter, we are introduced to our enemies, the machines, beings that look rusty and attack in a sort of mindless frenzy, unlike the human-like movements and sophistication of 2B. Their unprovoked attack also makes it clear that, in this conflict, it is kill or to be killed, setting up these tiny machines as the main antagonistic force of Nier Automata. Furthermore, it sets up the structure of the android faction, YorHa, with 2B in a frontline role as a main fighter, 9S acting as a supporting unit in the field, and 6O, an operator who was doing communications with 2B at the very beginning of the game, playing the role of a handler. As we continue the story, it also expands on this point by showing us the Bunker, the spaceborne station that acts as the base of operations for YorHa, led by the White Commander, showing YorHa as a sophisticated force fighting against the numerous waves of machines on Earth's surface. As we progress in the story, we are introduced to even more of the world as we explore, opening up new pathways as well as various areas of the world that are connected to the central hub, the city ruins. With each of these individual areas being tied to the story, we get to see these aesthetically different regions through the eyes of 2B, whether they are the abandoned apartments in the endless desert, overgrown lush canyons, flooded ruins, or the haven of friendly machines hidden in the backyard of an amusement park. Route A also gives us our first run-through of the story itself, showing us how the events of the abandoned factory spiral into a mess of aiding rebel androids, to fighting A2 over a machine baby, and witnessing the continued evolution of machine lifeforms through metallic eggs. Route A is the foundational playthrough, not only for the events of the game but also the game itself, weaving a central line that the player treks through lore, gameplay, and for the overarching narrative. Each route is also characterized by the character we play, which is what makes each playthrough interesting due to these different perspectives. For Route A, this comes in the form of a more combat-heavy first playthrough, with 2B's gameplay being more combat-oriented comparatively to 9S, who deals less damage on average than 2B. It is certainly also reflected in its story beats, which reflect a very different vibe to Route B, with 2B being pitted against a wide variety of large-scale bosses, and sometimes fighting alone with 9S operating more in the background. Combat defines 2B, because it is her function as a beater model comparatively to 9S, and the older generation of androids like A2. This is also reflected in their individual personalities, with 2B often being colder and stoic to increase combat efficiency, being a large contrast with 9S's more explorative and friendly nature. It's these differences that define Route A, especially when we touch on 9S and Route B later. We can also see this in unique side missions like Jackass's Request, which only appears in Route A, and this side mission is built for 2B as a series of combat challenges like avoiding damage or destroying enemies in a limited time, challenges that can't be found in other routes. Despite the idea that combat defines 2B, Route A has a recurring theme in it that works in direct opposition to combat, which is the idea of emotion, especially in the context of androids like 2B. From the beginning of the game, we are shown that 2B is a cold character who focuses on completing missions and heavily contrasts with how 9S operates as a scouting unit. While the game initially suggests that YorHa units are not permitted to feel, this is something quickly refuted by 9S and also 2B, who remarks that 9S should not address her so formally and to drop the san that is used as a show of respect under the Japanese keigo system. 2B and 9S also converse as 2B heads deeper into the factory, suggesting that the idea of mission efficiency is more of a facade than actual operation standards. When Chapter 1 begins, we are alone, and when 9S comes to finish off Marks in the initial boss fight, he doesn't stay for too long before flying away to aid in the infiltration process. And while we don't see him indoors when 2B approaches on foot, we know he's present through the aforementioned conversations through the communication system. When we do finally see him again, it is during our fight against the first Angles boss, when he hacks into the machine's weapon system. His presence, however, is very short-lived, as he charges Flight Unit and all into Angle's arm to deflect its attack, leaving him stranded and without an arm and a leg atop the gigantic being. This is where we first see 2B's shell break. We may not have known 9S for very long, but he was involved in saving us from both Marks and Angles, with his friendly demeanor and conversations being a comforting presence while exploring the factory. We see 2B yell out in concern for 9S as he crashes into Angles, with 2B going against Pod 042's suggestion and heading in to rescue him. While 2B is successful in reaching 9S and defeating the first Angles, both units are surrounded by several other Angle model machines. With nowhere left to run, 9S suggests that they detonate their cores through nuclear fission, bringing down the other three machines with them and uploading their memory back to the bunker. When 2B wakes in the bunker, she goes to find 9S, only to find that 9S only had enough time to upload 2B's memories back to the bunker and not his, meaning that their shared experience at the abandoned factory had been lost into cyberspace. And this is where we see 2B being visually frustrated at losing an ally she had befriended, clenching her fist before the scene changes. Throughout the story, it is clear that 2B's heart is warming up to 9S, shifting from initial stoicism to a comradeship that shares these adventures in the open world. Some suggest that it's romantic feelings that develop between the two characters, but it doesn't even have to be a relationship defined by love at all in this context, and is really just 2B and 9S respecting one another, with 2B's behavior in Chapter 10 juxtaposing her initial behavior in Chapter 1. This shift is felt throughout the duration of Route A's story, but there are also several story moments that really highlight 2B's shell breaking and how she feels about 9S. We have the events of Chapter 1, but there are also similar moments just like that during Route A, usually in situations where 9S is temporarily out of the action. One example are the events of Chapter 8, which takes place after 9S goes missing in the aftermath of the Grun boss fight in Chapter 7. With 9S nowhere to be found, 2B asks Pod 042, her companion, to locate 9S's location through his black box signal, using that core as a homing beacon of sorts. When asking several damaged YorHa units in the sunken city, it is clear that 2B is somewhat desperate for information, asking politely of other models if they have any intel on 9S's whereabouts. As 2B follows the direction of the scanner, the signal leads to a location below ground, accessible through an elevator system hidden beneath the city ruins. Pod 042 warns 2B that this would likely lead to an enemy ambush, to which 2B replies that she simply does not care. On arriving to a lower level, 2B finds herself within the copied city, littered with the remains of other YorHa units and several machine lifeforms. As she reaches the central courtyard, she encounters Adam, one of two human-like machines that 2B and 9S originally encountered in Chapter 2. As Adam engages 2B in combat, he muses on humanity's complexity and their emotions, to which 2B harshly suggests that perhaps Adam does not understand humanity at all. She further adds that she does not have time for this, she has to find 9S. During the fight, Adam briefly pauses to reveal that he had captured 9S and had him embedded in the walls of the clock tower. When he does so, we see that 2B is very visibly angry, clearly stating her intent to kill Adam for his actions, something the latter continues to goad her on with, saying that's it, that's the feeling, pure hate, provoking 2B to take the fight more seriously and ultimately leading to his own demise when 2B deals the final blow with a sword through his abdomen. When the fight is over, 2B's immediate concern is to tend to 9S, telling him that they should go home. This moment really shows how she cares for her missing ally, one that she is able to save from the clutches of the enemy. Another moment where we are shown how 2B really feels is at the end of Route A itself. In the aftermath of Chapter 8 and the Machine Cult in Chapter 9, 2B and 9S finally head to confront Adam's brother, Eve, who is currently being driven to avenge the death of his brother by eliminating both units. During the fight, 9S attempts to hack into Eve to counteract his healing abilities, which works temporarily before Eve rebuffs both units and slowly strips them away of their close combat and long-range combat abilities. With both Android and Machine forced to a breaking point, 2B is finally able to eliminate Eve. But while the fight is over, 9S realizes he has been infected by a logic virus as his eyes gleam red, a result of hacking into the Machine network earlier. Despite protests from 2B, 9S insists that he must be eliminated to prevent the virus from reaching the bunker servers. With no other option, 2B is forced to kill her friend and, as 9S takes his last breath, 2B breaks down into sobs over his lifeless body, lamenting that things always seem to turn out this way. This sadness gives way to anger as she notices that a machine lifeform is still operational. As she grabs her broken sword, the lone machine lifeform joins a sea of little heads glimmering away as a larger machine rises from the rubble, revealing itself to be 9S, at least a version of him that was reformed using the machine network. As 9S rumbles away, 2B interrupts him to simply say, "I'm glad you're okay," a show of relief with the machine network neutralized as the screen fades to black. 2B's character arc within Route A is one marked by emotion, with many of the events of the game leading up to these moments in Chapter 8 and in Chapter 10. In a sense, it's a culmination of a developing relationship between both 2B and 9S, and creates a contrast to how they were initially in Chapter 1. And while I say that 2B's character arc is marked by emotion, it's also important to point out that Route A has a larger focus on this theme in the context of androids, with a further exploration of this theme continuing to bleed into both Route B and Route C and D. As I previously mentioned, Route A is an introductory look at Automata's world, with its different forces and players needing to progress the story and do side missions to further explore its underlying lore. Our first image of these YorHa forces in Route A is one of sophistication, with their appearance and technology looking and feeling superior to machine technology, with its sleeker look and better adaptability to the environment. When we first go through Route A, we have the impression that YorHa is advanced, with a structured unit production lending to greater combat efficiency, with units assigned to frontline assault, defense, operations, and so on. This is similarly reflected in 2B, who carries that same air of cold efficiency, but it is also something that we have seen change over the course of these 10 chapters. In that same sense, YorHa as an organization is just as flawed, and are different from this clean image of them. For starters, we have their personalities. In the first chapter, 2B insinuates that emotions aren't allowed for YorHa androids, and that somewhat seems to be the case when we consider the ending of Chapter 1 in the bunker, where we see all operators within the operations room. But this is really more of a suggestion on missions than anything else, because we see that 9S has a much more cheerful personality, and when we get to know different units on board the bunker and in the resistance camp, we know for sure this is not true, or at the very least, not something that is strictly dealt with. One particular character that embodies this in Route A is 6O, who you may recall I mentioned earlier as being 2B's handler/operator, who frequently contacts 2B and provides updates. Comparatively to fellow O-type android 21O, who is 9S's handler, 6O's personality is very bubbly and often excited. This is in direct contrast to 2B's own personality and her blunt communications, and can arguably be even more outgoing than 9S, especially considering that she likes to engage in non-essential communications as well, like asking 2B about the weather, or even talking about being rejected by a fellow android aboard the bunker. She also asks 2B to find and take a picture of a desert flower for her, which, unlike 21O asking for Earth's data, is a very personal request. These moments show how distinctive each android's personality is, and how they are not the same stone-faced killing force we have come to know, but a complex group of individuals who have their own motivations. Another aspect of YorHa's flaws can be discussed through a side mission unique to Route A, 11B's Memento. On board the bunker, players can encounter 16D, a defense-type model that was partnered with 11B, one of the members of the doomed descent operation at the beginning of Chapter 1. She asks us to find and recover 11B's body from the crash site, which 2B can find in the initial arena she fought Marks in. On recovering the body, we find out through the black box logs that 11B had tried to use her crash as a cover for her desertion, but had inadvertently taken heavy damage and was unable to recover from them or contact the bunker. When players return to 16D, players have a choice to either reveal the contents of the black box or to take it with them to the grave. While deciding not to tell the truth results in 16D stating that she'll strive to become a B-type android like her mentor, the real interesting part is when players decide to hand over the logs. When players choose to do so, 16D begins to laugh. When 2B asks why she responded this way, 16D recounts that 11B was always being a hard-ass on her and looking down on her because she wasn't a combat model, thanking 2B for showing her the truth. The way that 16D presents this dialogue shows that YorHa is not that perfect fighting squadron we thought they were. From her dialogue, it suggests that 11B was always abusing her and putting her down, and 2B's information is like a sigh of relief for 16D, to know that, despite all that has been said or done, 11B was just as much of a coward for wanting to abandon her post, with 16D saying it was such a miserable way for them to die. It really shows that YorHa is more than just fighting androids, but also androids with personalities and lives of their own, like how 16D said she and 11B were in a relationship before her demise. Of course, the idea of androids being imperfect isn't necessarily limited to YorHa itself. Server Resistance character side missions reflect a similar theme, like the Resistance android who stole YorHa chips to make a partner, or the YorHa Betrayers side mission where 2B and 9S have to hunt down rogue YorHa units. Both these missions show that all of these androids are a lot more complex than we have given them credit for, but more so it reflects the toll of the ongoing conflict on even the most advanced androids. But the way that things are presented in Route A to us, the player, we can see that things aren't always what they seem on the surface. While we definitely put ourselves as the hero of the story with the all-powerful bunker, we are also presented with a doubt of whether we are truly that efficient, unfeeling android force. We see this in 2B's emotional development across 10 chapters, and we see this in various YorHa characters that highlight a darker aspect of YorHa itself, asking players if YorHa is really all that it is made out to be. When the player returns to the main menu screen at the conclusion of Route A, they'll be greeted by the Continue button, presumably to re-enter the game right before the events of Chapter 10. This button, however, hides the beginning of Route B and the second playthrough of Automata's story. When players press the Continue button and select their save file, they are placed into the shoes of a small stubby who is trying to wake up their brother. We take control of the small machine as it fills up a bucket with oil, which it uses to splash on the machine in hopes of waking it up. As it does so, the camera zooms out to reveal 9S, who is idly observing the machine, saying that no matter how much oil it gives the machine, you can't make the machine your brother. As he says this, he notices movement in the skies and prepares to support the incoming team on their descent operation, with 21-0 getting in contact with him to aid 2B and her team. This is where Route B starts, and it is clear that it isn't a carbon copy of Route A, nor is it an alternate route. What it is a retelling of Chapter 1 to 10 through the eyes of 9S, rather than 2B, experiencing the events of Automata from a different angle, and to perhaps see the world differently. As 9S enters the tunnels, we maneuver our flight unit to fight several enemies, reaching the defenses which we are able to hack into, introducing us to the hacking minigame where Mini Cursor shoots at the Black Machine core while dodging projectiles, like some kind of mini bullet hell arcade game. Once all defenses are disabled, 9S meets up with 2B in the same way we see in Route A, landing the killing blow on the machine Marks. From there, we re-experience dialogue between the two, with us now in 9S's flight suit fighting enemies on the perimeter, instead of playing as 2B walking within the factory. Again, we reach the Angle's machine, but this time we have the flight suit to shoot the enemy, utilizing our hacking ability to further weaken the machine in time to intercept servo missiles and blast Angles themselves. As Angles deactivates momentarily, it swats 9S out of the sky, heavily injuring him and leaving him stranded atop the machine itself. As 9S transfers control of the flight suit to 2B, he's left to fend for himself against waves of stubby enemies, only using Pod 153 to shoot and destroy them as he is unable to wield a weapon. Finding a weakness in Angle's subroutine, 9S hacks in and allows 2B to utilize its arm, just as we saw in Route A, to finally defeat Angles before the two units are forced to blow up their black boxes to defeat the remaining Angles units. From the first chapter, Route B is already distinctive from Route A. There is the aforementioned perspective shift to 9S, making the events of Automata unique in Route B. There is also the matter of 9S's hacking ability as a support unit, being able to access ports which are represented as a triangle icon. These were inaccessible to 2B in Route A and opens up new possibilities in Route B, like extra chests and being able to complete several unique side missions. Hacking is also an additional source of combat damage for 9S, who is weaker than 2B with his single weapon, being able to damage enemies internally as well as externally. Experiencing chapters 1 to 10 as 9S further gives a new perspective to the story. From the first chapter, we already see this shift, with 9S's observation of the stubby and also his desperate fight for survival atop Angles, while 2B attempts to get close. I mentioned previously in the prior section that in Route A, there are often times where 9S would be absent, and Route B shows us what happens during these absences, showing how 9S's actions have helped in the missions ahead. Perhaps the most important thing in this new perspective is when it is combined with the hacking skill. This is because 9S's hacking ability allows him to peek into the machine's psyche, something that would not be available for 2B or A2. And while this isn't something we witness through the entirety of Route B itself, it does play an important role in further delving into the lore and themes of this game, as it gives the player a chance to delve below the surface of what we see. There are 3 different ways that Route B showcases these behind the scenes moments, with one appearing quite shortly after Chapter 1, when players reach the desert area for a second time. When 9S reaches the ridge just before the beginning of the desert area, the screen fades to black and a cutscene plays out on screen. Visually, it resembles an old-timey film, with its flickering and its use of a more singular color palette. In it, an unknown and unseen narrator recounts a story of a god who was born from an erupting volcano, and how this god appeared before the machines, giving them a consciousness and teaching them the meaning of life. When this cutscene ends, we see that neither 2B or 9S are any the wiser, yet we, the player, have become privy to this lore of the machines. These cutscenes are known as picture books and are often played between chapters in poetic prose, describing the emotional changes and stories of the machines. The art style of the picture books themselves closely resemble that of the weapon stories, which are unlockable through regular gameplay by upgrading weapons to their max level. Picture books in general cover the history of machines, from the discovery of feeling, to how Grun was abandoned, and to how Emil fought the aliens when they first arrived on Earth. They showcase a history that is harder for us to come across, and give us a better understanding of how various factions and their motivations came to be. As Route B continues, we are introduced to another unseen moment. While the events of Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 play out very similarly to Route A, right before players reach the amusement park in Chapter 4, the screen once again fades to black as we emerge into a metallic room, with a single light illuminating the 2 trusty pods, Pod 042 and Pod 153, who are assigned to 2B and 9S respectively. In this space, we see Pod 042 initiate a line of communication with Pod 153, suggesting they exchange combat information to increase efficiency between the respective units. While this exchange is initially played off as a weird interaction between pods, it does continue to play a further role in the future, especially in Route C and D, which we'll touch upon later. What is important in the context of Route B is the continued proliferation of seeing things behind the veil, and how the events of Route A are truly just the tip of the iceberg, with more moving parts and character motivations running in the back instead of just a line of cool bosses to fight. We are also quickly introduced to the third and final method that Root B showcases these moments to us when we fight Simone inside the amusement park theater. During the fight, 9S is able to leverage his hacking ability to deal more damage to the machine, but as he does so, we're also shown a series of flashbacks as we see Simone growing from a small stubby into the machine she is today, all in the name of chasing after beauty standards. And while she keeps growing, she never wins the admiration of the mysterious machine, who is probably the philosopher Jean-Paul, and loses her mind in this endless pursuit. However, right before we land the final blow, we get a flashback in the form of pure text running on the screen. These are novels, solely text-based sequences within the game that run like a visual novel, giving players a much more in-depth exploration of character emotions. Just like for Simone in this scenario, the novel delves into her journey into insanity and how her goal of beauty is what wins love drove her to build an identity based on old world culture, and to consume both android and machines to feed her desire. As 2B lasers rip through her core, we feel for Simone and her helpless journey. The drastic difference in medium from visual to literary is jarring, but also lends to a more in-depth exploration of the internal thoughts of these machines, which would never be provided in the form of dialogue during the main game. Similar to the pod conversations earlier, this isn't the last time we'd see novels either, as we will see their presence again in Route C and D. These three narrative tools are used through Route B and Route C and D to provide more context and lore to various characters, but this ability to see things below the surface is something possessed by 9S from his hacking abilities. In a sense, Route A introduces us to the world, but it is Route B, 9S's hacking abilities, and these narrative tools that add onto the initial framework of Automata's world. And while a lot of Route B can seem similar to Route A, especially in its open world elements and repeated side missions, 9S plays a massive role in showing us this lore, especially from Chapter 7 onwards, which is the last time that players can explore the open world before rollercoaster events lead to the end of the game. Like in Route A, 9S is put out of commission in the aftermath of the Groon boss fight in Chapter 7, and kidnapped by Adam during the events of Chapter 8 within the copied city. While this would usually involve 2B fighting Adam within the copied city, we instead see things from the perspective of 9S within the cyberspace, navigating a complex branching pathway that is dissimilar from the straightforward structure that we normally see in YorHa's systems. This is where 9S surmises that he is inside the machine network and continues to explore the labyrinth. As he continues to navigate these pathways, we hear a voice, revealed to be Adam, suggesting that machines have already evolved into more complex beings, and were not the simple beings that we thought they were. 9S vehemently denies this, but Adam continues to taunt him, telling him that androids are no more free than machines are within this world. He continues to taunt him until he drops this line. This line, while suggestive, is done to mess with 9S, who struggles against the network as the screen glitches to white. Here we are quickly shown another picture book narrating how machines came to find their own treasures, items of focus or goals that different machines had. Some treasured family, some treasured love, but one machine treasured hate, which is Adam, as we saw in Chapter 8. When we do come to, 9S is again in cyberspace, but this time rebooting himself through YorHa's network. As he works his way through the bunker network, he finds documents suggesting that the Council of Humanity was crafted as a part of the YorHa project, instead of the usual suggestion that the Council of Humanity existed before the YorHa project, and were the creators rather than the product. While he is confused, 9S pushes on, assisting 2B at the abandoned factory by hacking into a machine from the bunker. 9S works his way by hacking into progressively stronger and different enemies, fighting his way using one of their own. Unable to help 2B in time in her fight against Psyche, 9S instead hacks into the abandoned factory system, finding fragments of old reports from Project Gestalt, and also the core that controls the electrical grid of the factory. With the electrical grid down, 2B strikes down Psyche in one strike, as a relieved 9S detaches from the hacked network back into the bunker, but not before recalling the words of the machines who reminisce on how the factory cult came to be. As the events of the factory dies down and 9S is able to recollect his thoughts, he runs into the White Commander in the bunker's main corridor. Armed with his discovery within YorHa's systems, 9S confronts the White Commander, demanding to know whether the contents of the document are true. Instead of hiding the truth, the White Commander comes clean, telling 9S that humanity had long perished, with the Council of Humanity acting as a motivator for androids on the ground to continue fighting, telling him that they needed a god that they were willing to fight for, and giving 9S a choice of what he will do with that information before the screen fades to black. Chapter 10 continues much like Route A, with 9S taking a flight suit back to Earth's surface to support 2B in their final battle against Eve. In Route A, 2B would focus on buying time for 9S to hack into Eve's systems, but since we are playing as 9S in Route B, we assume control of this hacking attempt, entering the hacking space to attack Eve's core. As 9S works his way through Eve's system, he comes across a digital version of Eve who tries to stop 9S's infiltration attempt but is unsuccessful. With the final active line of defense broken, 9S hunts for the elusive core, haunted by Eve's thoughts and emotions along the way, lamenting the death of Adam during the events of Chapter 8. When 9S finally reaches the core, we instead find a scene of Eve and Adam talking, akin to similar cutscenes we see in both Route A and B. This moment holds a memory where Eve tells Adam that, while he never disliked fighting, his main goal this entire time was to make sure his brother didn't get hurt. With this cutscene over, 9S is successful in attacking the core, with the rest of the fight playing out in the same way as it was in Route A, with 2B managing to land the finishing blow and having to eliminate 9S due to his exposure to the logic virus. From an overall story perspective, Route B is almost the same as Route A, because it follows that same journey of 9S and 2B, from the initial abandoned factory fights all the way to confronting Eve and 9S reforming using the machine network. With that being said, Route B further pushes the story forward by deepening existing lore in Route A, and by also exploring the machine lifeform faction. 9S's perspective in Automata can be described as being under the surface. While many of the events and story moments we see in Route A or what we saw visually and from dialogue, 9S can uncover emotions and memories that would not be conveyed through those mediums in Route A. We see this in the picture books, novels, and pod discussions throughout Route B, but also in 9S's own hacking ability that allows him to subvert appearances and go directly to their core. Without 9S, we wouldn't be privy to this kind of machine lore, a lore that humanizes them more than Route A would otherwise suggest. This image of machines draws a heavy contrast to the initial perception of these machines in Route A, but especially to the perception of the machines in early chapters like in Chapter 2, where 2B and 9S come across a group of machines rocking babies and playing in the desert arena before the first Adam fight. At the time, 9S described the group as mimicking human families, giving us the perception that these machines aren't emotionally complex and have to rely on imitation. While this might have been true when we started Automata, that has come to change in Route B, when we've come to know that machines are far more advanced, not only in the form of Adam and Eve, but also in the machines themselves. While it doesn't seem like they have advanced much on the surface, these machines have come to be more emotionally complex, exhibiting behavior that is far removed from the stubbies in Chapter 1, who only flail their arms around. Characters like Pascal are good examples of this, with the pacifist being more intellectual than other machines. Similarly, other side missions reflect the evolution of machines into smarter and more capable machines. One example of this is the Idiot Savant side mission, which can be found within Pascal's machine village when Pascal tells 9S that the younger machines were learning economics as part of their studies. Checking around the village, 9S comes across a group of 3 machines, with 2 of the machines mocking the other for being a weird idiot who always picks 1 coin instead of 2 if presented a choice between them. Thinking the machine probably has some broken circuitry unlike his fellow peers, 9S decides to hack into the stubby, revealing that the machine had a complex 9-core mechanism hidden behind several layers of protection. When successfully hacking into the core, 9S questions the little machine about why he chose the 1 coin instead of 2, despite his complex circuitry, to which the weird machine replies that it is all a ploy to earn more coins, because the other machines mock him and entertain themselves by repeatedly giving him the choice of 1 or 2 coins, showing this odd little machine's own advanced intellect, using it as a way to trick the other machines. Another example of a side mission that exhibits the complexity of the machine's thought process is the Wise Machine quest. While this quest is not strictly a side mission, it acts as a narrative addition to Route B, being also marked with a red dot on the map, which usually indicates a side quest or some point of interest. In the city ruins, 9S can find so-called wise machines at 3 locations, all standing on dangerous ledges and staring into space, unmoving. When 9S attempts to hack into these machines, he begins to hear a voice pondering the meaning of existence and why these machines were born. When successfully hacking into their core, 9S realizes that these are the machine's inner thoughts, as impossible as it may seem. Hacking into the second and third machines continued this internal dialogue, with the second machine dissecting their purpose as a fighting machine, while the third machine views life as being painful. With each machine, their internal circuitry also becomes more complex, with more cores and defenses that 9S must defeat in order to successfully hack into their main cores. When 9S finishes the hack into the third and final machine, the small machine finally speaks, making a final revelation that machines, while created to fight and reign over the world, were stuck in an endless cycle of combat, a cycle that neither loves nor cares for them and their destruction. With that revelation, the machine concludes that the only way to relieve themselves from this cycle is by removing themselves from the equation, jumping from the tower into the dirt below. This morbid ending for these machines reflect two different things within the world of Automata. The first is that the machines have indeed evolved, just like Adam mentioned and just like we saw in Idiot Savant. It is these improvements to their hardware that results in the second thing, the fact that this has resulted in many machines, and not only these wives and machines, developing their own sense of consciousness, allowing them to explore stronger philosophical questions like the meaning of life, in contrast to the mindless attacking force that they may have initially been in the first couple of chapters. It is these kind of side missions that offer us a glimpse into the machine mentality, one that we cannot get in Route A. Apart from the Idiot Savant and the Wise Machine quest, other side missions similarly show these machines developing a much more complex consciousness, like the game dev machine side quest, where a machine asks 9S to help them stress test a new game that they are making, or the Recluse, where a juvenile machine locks themselves up in fear of the unknown after they had disconnected from the machine network. Because of the way things are presented in Route A, machines don't get the same kind of attention and spotlight as androids do. This is because Route A's introductory nature pushes the narrative to be more in line with exploring the side of the androids first, before coming to focus more on these machines in Route B. There's a reason why we need such a wealth of storytelling devices in Route B, because we cannot unlock these nuanced perspectives through just pure dialogue with the machines themselves. On top of that, Route B also adds in extra cutscenes like in the Forest Zone, where we are able to see Emis, the king of the forest, speak to his loyal subjects. Route B is about fleshing out these perspectives that we cannot see in Route A, making the machines more than just two-dimensional soldiers and turning them into creations that are finding their path in the world, much like the YorHa androids themselves. There is one more unique mission to Route B that I'd like to touch on before concluding the first part of 9S's journey. The reason why I mention it now is because it sets the tone for the upcoming routes of C and D, while still relying on this idea of 9S being able to see below the surface. This quest is the Amnesia quest, which players can pick up from a red-haired resistance member holed up in an abandoned apartment building in the city ruins, close to the initial landing site in Chapter 2. Similar to the 11B's Memento side quest in Route A, the resistance member asked 9S and 2B to help retrieve her friend's final moments, which were recorded within a pod that they can no longer access due to its damaged state. On accepting the mission, 9S hacks into the pod to reveal that this friend was murdered by a humanoid being, unlikely to be a machine but instead an android. Tracking down the origins of the red hood that the killer was wearing within the picture, 9S confronts Jackass, who supposedly gave this hood to her friend. Instead of helping to ID the killer, Jackass instead tells the pair that she herself originally bought the hood off a red-haired android, matching the description of the original mission giver back in the city ruins. When confronting the client back in the abandoned building, the android vehemently denies having a hand in killing her friend. Hacking into the pod to reconstruct its databanks, 9S finds a picture confirming that the killer was indeed the red-haired android. Confused and disorientated from this discovery, the Resistance android suddenly comes to, remembering that she is no Resistance android at all, but instead a YorHa Type E android. Her mission was to infiltrate and execute traitors and deserters within the Resistance and YorHa ranks, thereby her designation, and had deleted her memories due to the growing emotional detachment and pressure she felt from having to kill her closest allies and friends. When 9S asks if she's okay, she slowly devolves into insanity as she claims that she is very much okay and just doing her job. This breakdown of the Type E android has a similar feeling to the end of 11B's Memento, with the difference being that there is no choice to be made at the end of the investigation. Similarly to telling 16D the truth about 11B's desertion, we are made to feel uncomfortable within the darkness that lurks below the surface of YorHa's own system. In Route A, this comes in the form of the android's quote-unquote humanity, which sees them exhibiting more emotional qualities than first suggested, having these interpersonal relationships, but also the ability to harbor negative emotions, much like 16D did for 11B's actions that she felt put her down. In Route B, this isn't about the same humanity, but rather insanity. Throughout Route B, we come to terms with these machines that grow a consciousness and develop their own societies. We see Pascal's machine village that thrives in peace, but we also see communities like the Cult of Purple Machines in Chapter 9, who go insane with the idea that they can chase divinity like their leader. The Type E android's descent into madness reflects a much darker aspect of the world, further than the glimpses of humanity we see in androids and machines in Route A. Rather, it shows more sinister forces are in play behind the scenes, with players having to question why YorHa would even need such Type E androids, and whether much darker secrets are waiting to be uncovered as the path continues on in Nier Automata. Unlike Route B, players aren't directly thrown back to the home screen at the conclusion of Chapter 10 and the final battle against Eve. Instead, Automata presents the player with a smaller trailer of events that come in Routes C and D, mainly the events where the YorHa forces, under the leadership of the White Commander, are about to launch their final major offensive against the machines, in an attempt to wipe them out completely, now that their leaders and machine network are disabled. Like I previously mentioned, the events of Route A and Route B are sort of building blocks for the world of Automata, with Route A being an introduction to the world and gameplay, while Route B played the part of deepening the world's lore and the factions that populate it. It is from these two paths that the story leads into Route C and D, aka the final arc of the story. Route C and D is usually labeled in this fashion, rather than having a singular letter like the previous two routes, due to the fact that it can lead to two endings depending on the player choice near the end of the game. For the most part, the story of Routes C and D are the same, acting as a continuation of the events of Route A and B, with players accompanying YorHa forces in their war on the machines. It is also why I'll be referring it to as Route CD, just so I can stop saying the word "and" in between. When players return to the main menu once again after the conclusion of the trailer, they will find that the background of the title screen has changed, shifting from the initial abandoned factory wallpaper in the previous two routes to one of Emil's home, specifically the garden of white lunateer flowers that players can find underneath the shopping center at the beginning of the forest zone. Even if players did not complete Emil's side quests, like I did when playing this route, this change in aesthetic signals a change in the story's trajectory, moving on from the story of Adam and Eve and into a different territory, with the war against the machines. As this new route opens up, we see the YorHa forces of the bunker prepare for war, with proper wartime uniforms, atypical from the dresses that 2B usually wears in Route A and B. As 2B launches from the bunker to join her fellow androids on the ground, 9S narrates over the dark screen, stating that before he could make up his mind to tell 2B about his findings in Route B, the final major operation of the bunker had begun.
2B に真実を告げることができないまま、最後の大規模侵攻作戦が開始された。だけど、僕はまだ知らなかった。この戦いの結末と、僕たちの運命を。
In the opening of Route CD, players bounce between 9S and 2B, starting with 9S, who works on the ground to disable enemy defense systems before YorHa forces make their landing. When 2B does land, 9S joins her in linking up with other YorHa squadrons, fighting waves and waves of machines and struggling to deal with the sheer number of enemies. As the YorHa forces mount their final assault, 2B and several other androids are hit by a machine EMP ambush, temporarily putting them out of action and forcing 9S to hold them off while they do a system reset. While 9S is successful in warding off the enemies, it isn't long before the same YorHa androids are hit by an unknown force, which 9S suggests is a virus attack. Those infected start laughing maniacally, their eyes changing from green to red as they attack 9S and 2B, who flee and return to the bunker. Returning to the bunker via the terminal system, they rush to warn the White Commander, yet their warning falls on deaf ears as the Commander suspects that they are the infected ones. But this quickly proves false as the androids aboard the bunker begin attacking the trio, with 9S noting that their separate data backups are the only reason they were spared from the attack. 2B and 9S fight their former comrades on their way to the hangar for flight suits, fearing the terminals themselves may have been infected. Despite reaching the hangar safely, the White Commander refuses to follow, revealing that she too had been infected as her data was also stored on the server. At this point, the pair have no choice but to escape the bunker, becoming the last two members of YorHa to survive. Crash landing on Earth's surface, 2B finds herself alone and heavily injured, and also infected by the virus, albeit at a much slower rate than her former comrades. Unable to stop the infection, 2B tasks Pod 042 to find a location with fewer androids, to lower the impact once the infection fully takes over. Stripped of her combat capabilities, 2B evades machines to reach the shopping mall at the edge of the city ruins, where she attempts to fight off a few infected androids. Defenseless, 2B prepares to die, but is saved by A2, who she requests to hold on to her memories. This is where we cut to 9S, who has crashed elsewhere on the map. Following her black box signal, he arrives at the mall in time to see A2 impaling 2B on her own sword, a mercy killing. Unaware of why A2 has done this, 9S screams in rage and charges towards her while A2 watches on, cutting her hair short like 2B's. As 9S crosses the bridge, a white structure rises from the ground, collapsing the bridge and sending 9S into the chasm below. A2 watches on as it takes the shape of a tower looming over the city as the logo reveals itself for the third and final time. To say the first 1 to 2 hours of Route CD is a rollercoaster is an understatement. Unlike how Nier Replicant keeps the same story in its roots, Automata sees this new route being a continuation of the events of Route A and B, turning the norm of the first 2 routes on its own head. For starters, YorHa is now gone. The bunker is gone, with 9S being the only remnant of its once proud army, and A2 a small piece of its prior history. I previously mentioned that in Route A, YorHa often seemed like the superior faction, yet seemed to have flaws hiding underneath its surface, and here we see these flaws exploited to a deadly conclusion for YorHa. On top of that, we see the emotional flaws of androids begin to take form within 9S, whose shock over 2B's death sends him down a path of emotional instability, something that will only worsen throughout Route CD. The second change are the machines, who display a new assortment of technology previously unseen. The use of EMPs, viral attacks, and direct sabotage of android systems are all methods that we never saw in Route A or B, suggesting that the machines are not as simple as first assumed, a notion that comes from Route B, meaning that Adam has always been right to say that machines were more advanced than YorHa ever knew, with this opening now demonstrating its horrifying power. This is not to say that we didn't know that machines were capable of advanced technology, with side missions like the Half-Wit Inventor showing us that the creation of such structures are possible, visible as a launch tower behind the amusement park, and which bears a similarity to the tower itself, standing as a testament that machines can create complex and sleeker structures, different from the rusty look they present themselves with during our regular interactions at the Machine Village. This new route also bounces between the perspectives of A2 and 9S, instead of just one android like the previous routes. Hence, players are also given the ability to choose between A2 and 9S's perspective at certain checkpoints. There actually isn't any lasting impact on who to choose first, as both storylines play out almost side by side, with A2's storyline being just a little bit earlier. The real thread is the dialogue between the pods in between chapters, something I'll cover later in the context of Ending E. A2 and 9S's stories are played out separately because of how different the two are tonally. While both androids eventually end up at the tower at the end of the route, the journey before unlocking its doors are unique to Android. A2's story explores the older line of YorHa androids and retreads the old ground of Route A and B, taking a more empathetic tone. In comparison, 9S's story is darker and largely fueled by his own desire for revenge and destruction, and takes on a contemplative perspective to the themes of Route A and B. A2's journey is particularly interesting because, despite this new route being a continuation, we don't really know much about her except for the prior boss fight in Routes A and B, and the knowledge that she is wanted by YorHa for desertion and the destruction of several pursuit units. In a way, she becomes a new 2B, taking on her memories, her appearance, but also taking the same lessons that 2B did from Route A. Route CD is hard to narrate properly and linearly because of these changing perspectives, especially since neither android has much shared story apart from the few times they meet. Even so, both androids have a similar starting point, which is waking up after the creation of the tower and their initial discussions with their pods. Because of the destruction of YorHa, there is no longer a proper chain of command, so both Pod 042, or formerly 2B's pod, and Pod 153 ask their respective androids at the beginning of the stories about their intentions, as a way to better provide aid. Both androids reply with the same intention, to destroy all the machines, with 9S additionally mentioning revenge on A2.
命令だからやるんじゃない。僕が決めたんだ。機械生命体は殲滅する。そして A2 を殺す。
So while they have the same beginning, where they end up is very different, with A2's journey contrasting how Route CD starts, and 9S's journey contrasting his own development in Route A and B. Waking up in the city ruins, A2 explores the area as Pod 042 endlessly bugs her regarding her own intentions. When she answers that she wants to kill all the machines, Pod 042 complies by identifying a Goliath-class machine hiding out in the desert. Heading out to the desert, she finds Hegel, a machine made of multiple spherical units, similar to Bokushi from Chapter 9. Finding an enemy that can combine and separate at will, A2 decides to activate her B mode, overclocking her cores to temporarily increase her damage output at the cost of her defense and health. Despite the strain it takes on her body, A2 is able to utilize the ability to nearly deal the final blow, but not before Hegel uses one final EMP attack on her, forcing her to navigate the net space to defeat Hegel properly. As she fights against the waves of cores, A2 is bombarded by voices, a mix of machines, A2's memories, and 2B's memories, all coalescing into one. A2 eventually confronts a black blob at the very center of the network, one that she dispatches in short order. Collapsing from exhaustion, fragments of 2B's memories appear alongside her, telling her that they are the same and that there is no one to save them and that they're only able to cry and scream, before A2 interrupts her and the screen fades to black. The first chapter for A2 introduces the new Berserk function, which, before the fight, players can also identify through her unique dashing or running animation that makes it look like she's bleeding. This ability reflects her status as an older model, as Pod 042 also remarks that the benefits of the mode do not outweigh the potential downsides, the main reason why this is no longer a function implemented in newer YorHa models. Having this ability also shows us just how much we have to learn about A2. Since encountering her in the forest, we've only known that A2 was a traitor and an older model of android, an A-type attack model. It sets up the idea that there is still more to learn about the early days of YorHa, something that will come eventually in the form of an anemone and a certain collectible to be discussed later. A2's journey is largely defined by learning to empathize with the machines, notably how they are more than enemies, similar to 2B and 9S in Route A and B. We get this in her story through her interactions with Pascal, fellow machines in the village, as well as her interactions with Resistance camp members. This journey starts after the Hegel boss fight, when Pod 042 identifies that some of A2's parts are damaged and she returns to the Resistance camp for some fixes. On arriving at the entrance, we see Pascal being attacked by some stubbies, which A2 quickly fends off. Intrigued by Pascal's non-violent and non-combative behavior, A2 lets him go before finding Anemone about these filters. This is where Anemone tells A2 that they're currently out of filter stock and that they trade with the machine village themselves, which surprises A2 as this goes against her perception of these machines. Forced to properly fix herself, A2 goes ahead and heads to the machine village to help out Pascal to obtain the necessary parts. After helping out Pascal, A2 also has the opportunity to help out several village members, mostly children, helping them to eliminate deadly threats or something as simple as collecting resources to build a slide for them to use. These missions, Vanquish the Bad Bot and Play With Us, both help A2 to slowly see that machines aren't necessarily killer bots, and that some can really be friendly. This makes A2's story thematically the same as Route A, except the juxtaposition of what machines are like are more in A2's head, since the player themselves are already aware of this theme. It catches A2 up to where 2B was in Route A and plays a contrasting role to 9S's perspective, something to discuss later. Even with A2's reservations, she still helps out in the village, and when Pascal calls about an attack, A2 is ready to fight to save the village from cannibalizing itself. While she is unable to save the residents of the village from cannibalizing each other, A2 is able to link back up with Pascal at the abandoned factory, where he had managed to help several younger machines to safety. Locking the doors to protect them, A2 and Pascal face off against the rest of the rogue machines, who launch wave after wave of soldiers to their location. The pair fight off these forces on the ground and eventually commandeer an Engels model machine to fight off the toughest of these forces. After succeeding in fending off these forces, Pascal returns to the abandoned factory to find all the children dead, apparently by destroying their own circuitry and essentially killing themselves, afraid of what would happen if A2 and Pascal failed in their mission to protect them. Pascal breaks down upon seeing this, blaming himself for trying to teach them fear and vulnerability, human emotions and philosophical ideas that he had initially meant to enhance their mental growth, but had ultimately led to their demise. Unable to live with his choices, Pascal asks A2 to directly eliminate him, or to wipe his memories so he does not have to live with the horror. Players are then presented with a choice between the two. Choosing to destroy Pascal is straightforward, with A2 slicing through Pascal, with the latter thanking her before dying. but the other choice to erase his memories is much more haunting. When players choose to erase Pascal's memories, the pod steps in to fully erase his memories and do a full reset. While players will never directly talk to Pascal like that ever again in the story, if A2 visits the machine village, she can find Pascal acting as a merchant of random goods, but also of children cores and the limbs of his fellow machines, oblivious to the fact that these cores used to belong to his beloved village children. This hectic and tragic end of the machine village progresses the story on two fronts. The first, like I previously mentioned, is A2 being led to understand that machines are little more than just what she thought, and to discover the optimistic and empathetic potential within them, instead of seeing them as just mimics like 9S previously suggested. Characters like Pascal are proof of machines evolving beyond their pre-established logic circuits, learning and developing new emotions and thoughts on their own, much like in Root B. However, we also see the downside to this, because even through the development of philosophical works and their involvement of their own emotions, it can lead to grave consequences like at the abandoned factory. The second front is the machine network. The moment the village cannibalizes itself is similar to what happened at the resistance camp in Route A, with the machines going into a frenzy, attacking androids and machines alike. Previously, we knew that the reason Pascal and co were able to create a peaceful village was because they were disengaged from the network at a previous date. Yet now these same peaceful machines have gone insane, presumably because some of them are still attached to the network itself, suggesting a much darker machine force lurking below. We definitely get a reminder of this later as well, as A2 reaches the resource recovery unit in the amusement park, something we'll get into a little bit later. When reaching the top of the resource node and briefly meeting 9S again, A2 faces off against Auguste, a machine who has the body of a regular biped, but arms that are made of machine heads. While Auguste itself is not the biggest threat, we see that smaller machines come to its aid during the fight, all calling it Big Brother. Even when Auguste eventually falls, these smaller machines keep calling it Big Brother, rushing with buckets on their head, reminiscent of the beginning of Route B, where a small machine attempted to revive a larger machine with a bucket of oil. Watching on, A2 sighs before reluctantly destroying them all before we cut back to 9S's perspective. Unlike the ones in the village, Auguste is much more like the typical machine, with the smaller machine behavior being more of a mimicry, rather than an evolution of their thought process. Instead of learning and building their own behaviors, these smaller machines have instead opted to base their entire behavior on humanity's information, a recurring theme we'll see again in 9S's side of the story. In comparison to A2's story, 9S's is less optimistic and often even nihilistic. This stems from discoveries at the end of Route B, as well as his own deteriorating mental state with 2B's death at the beginning of Route CD, which begins to change his own behavior and attitude against the machines during his pre-tower story, a different 9S than the curious one in Route B. In the aftermath of the tower rising up, 9S is woken up by Devila and Popula, a pair of twins that players of Nier Replicant would be familiar with, but a smaller side character that I will touch on a bit later in Nier Automata. After he is given the all clear, 9S heads to investigate the tower, along with Pod 153. On arrival, 9S finds the tower is locked, with a voice telling him that the tower will be locked until all the subunits, or resource recovery units, are disabled. Pod 153 guides him to the forest zone, where he finds the first subunit, which activates its defense mode when he gets close. On reaching the access door, he finds some text which the pod identifies as meaning meat box. As he steps inside, 9S wonders if the subunit itself is made up of machine parts, to which the pod suggests that it is made of useless and non-functional machine parts, to which 9S replies that nothing machines do have any real meaning to them. As 9S ascends the floors of the subunit, he fights off several waves of machines, a mix of the Force Zone's local soldiers who are seeking revenge for their king, as well as regular machine soldiers who, during the fight against 9S, keep yelling out in pain, saying that they do not want to die. As he continues to fight these machines, more and more of them join in the chorus of "It Hurts" and "Nichan," with 9S yelling at them to shut up as he continues to destroy even more reinforcements. When he reaches the top, Pod 153 suggests that these machine parts will be reused for a potential weapon, and when 9S defeats the last one of the machines, he finds a small core calling out for help and to be saved. In response, 9S shoots the core at close range and leaves, as several machines call out asking him what do we ever do and asking 9S to put them out of their misery. Following the recovery units, 9S finds the next one in the flooded city, which again activates defense mode when he gets close, but this time this one says Soul Box. When entering the unit, he finds that no enemies are present except for a locked box in the middle of the room which he is able to unlock with his hacking ability. As he goes up floor by floor, he finds no other enemies, only more chests that must be unlocked via hacking, finding information regarding how the tower was built, but also something else, a top secret document that indicates that the Android black boxes are made from reused machine cores, causing 9S to wonder why the secret was kept from them at all. When reaching the top, 9S finds the same core, which he hacks into this time, finding himself in a room surrounded with his own memories and a holographic 2B standing in the middle. As he approaches, the memories and the remnants of 2B's data begin to corrupt into a black mass, which 9S fights and eventually stabs over and over again before finally stabbing the core itself, and thus disabling unit number 2. These first two resource recovery units that 9S explores shows a much darker side than A2's story. While we are shown 9S's deteriorating mental state throughout these events, the biggest aspect is more so on the machines themselves. Root CD can be said to be a root of revelations, notably about the machine network and their motivations, with a lot of this being in the tower, unraveling the thread that 9S began to pull in Root B. When 9S reaches the third and final resource recovery unit in the amusement park, he finds that the final unit marked with the name Godbox on it. While the previous two had made sense in hindsight, this new one was different, suggesting that the machines wanted to reach godhood, or perhaps some form of immortality. Fighting through waves of machines, 9S continues to keep pushing forward until he reaches an elevator that takes him directly to the top. On reaching the top, he finds a familiar face, 21O, now designated 21B for the war effort, dressed in armor and heavily infected by the virus, and originally reported as MIA during YorHa's last attack. Forced to defend himself, 9S faces off against 21O, who is still internally fighting against the virus, interjecting the fight with bits and pieces of her consciousness, her desires, and her own emotions. Destroying her and her machine defenses, 9S is able to knock her down. Still functional, 21O attempts to get up, but is stabbed by A2, who had just arrived. As A2 turns to leave, she tells 9S that 2B's wish for him was for him to be a good person, which 9S ignores as he attempts to attack her, only for Gus to arrive and send 9S off the subunit. Prior to entering the tower, 9S's experiences coincide with that mental degradation, but also his inability to process his emotions regarding 2B's death. This in turn has become a distaste for any kind of machine, going from a once optimistic and curious android to a jaded and angry android who is trying to exact revenge on a cruel world. During Root CD, players can encounter two unique side missions for 9S that reflect the emotional healing process. The first is Gathering Keepsakes, which players can find shortly after 9S awakens at the Resistance camp. During this side mission, 9S helps a Resistance member find the dog tags of his former comrades, which he uses to create a memorial and a funeral for them. Despite not knowing the significance of these motions, he tells 9S that he copies the human tradition as a way to remember them. Inspired by this, 9S goes to Emil's garden, underneath the shopping mall, where he plants his own memorial for 2B amongst the moon tier flowers as a way to say goodbye to 2B. The second unique side mission is Reconnaissance Squad, which players can come across as 9S heads to the forest for the first subunit. Here, 9S comes across 4S, another scouting YorHa unit unaffected by the virus, but left alone since all his comrades had been killed in action. Helping 4S find the relevant information triggers a conversation between the two androids, with 4S telling 9S not to succumb to the sense of guilt, and to find a new way to live life from that day forward. Both of these side missions deal with a common theme, which is processing grief, and how one proceeds with their life. 4S finds purpose in continuing to collect data, but also recognizes that he cannot wallow in survivor's guilt, and must find a new way to quote-unquote live. The Resistance android processes his own grief by mimicking human traditions to honor the memory of his fallen comrades, which 9S copies as well. Throughout 9S's journey pre-tower, grief and revenge are wholly on his mind, acting as his driving force to continue fighting. For 9S, his processing of this grief is through that revenge, and is not quite able to let go of his own hatred for A2, especially since it arises out of a misunderstanding despite A2's repeated attempts to say otherwise. These side missions create contrast between how others deal with their grief versus how 9S deals with this, and while the grieving process can differ between people, 9S's own emotions are being tampered by his own descent into mania. While 4S and Resistance members are able to process these emotions and find a new direction in life, 9S is instead allowing it to twist its own perceptions towards machines, exhibiting a darker and cynical tone to their operations. This is something that continues into the tower and drives 9S fully over the edge by the climax of the route itself. Here is where I want to quickly take a pause to discuss something, and that is the tower itself. Up until now, I have barely discussed the events within the tower and how it ultimately contributes to both A2 and 9S's emotional and physical journeys within the game. Yet, I won't go too in depth into the tower itself for one simple reason. The fact that the tower is a roller coaster of revelations, epic scores, and duels to the death, something that, if I did go in depth into, would turn into a story summary rather than an analysis. What I do want to explore from the tower are the endings that players are able to unlock. After both A2 and 9S progress through the tower and defeat the machines, they have a final standoff at its peak, with players having to choose between A2 and 9S. If players choose A2, A2 fights 9S and manages to subdue him, utilizing Pod 042 to help infiltrate his systems to attempt to purge him of the logic virus. While she is able to restore 9S into his former uninfected state, A2 is stuck on the tower itself, doomed to fall along with it. However, before she falls, she states that she never realized how beautiful the world is before falling into the darkness below, resulting in ending C. If players choose 9S, his fight with A2 ends up with both of them mortally injured, with 9S's consciousness fading into a white space, recalling his own memories of meeting 2B, despite knowing her real designation as the number 2 Type E Executioner android. While in stasis, he is met by the machines, who confess that while the tower was originally meant as a cannon as Pod 153 surmised, it has been turned into an ark for which the machines have entrusted their consciousness and beings like Adam and Eve into, hoping to find a new world or home within the cosmos, now that their evolution is complete, with players also being offered the choice to join them aboard that ark. Whether or not 9S joins, the ark launches into space as the residents of Earth look on, fading into black and becoming Ending D. Both these endings reflect very different tones for these different characters. Ending C brings about a kind of optimism in A2, a contrast to the one that we see in the forest who is so tired of this world and unsure of her purpose but to destroy these machines. When killing 2B and taking on these memories, she's able to learn more about these machines and gain a feeling of empathy for them through Pascal. Hence, when she saves 9S and sacrifices herself to take down the tower, she sees the world once more in a positive light. For 9S, this emotion is less one of optimism and one of relief. Throughout Route CD, 9S has been spiraling into mania. What started as a simple revenge for 2B has become more obsessive and dark, with 2B haunting every part of his fight against the machines. When he fades into the white space, he reminisces on these memories that he shared with 2B, and when the red-dressed girl returns, he realized that perhaps there was never a reason to hate or fight the machines in the first place. All that hatred he held in him fades, and with it, any reason for the androids to continue fighting the machines, as he vanishes into this white space. Ultimately, we are given this contrast in character motivations and perspectives. A2, the android who is jaded by the war and who has gone on a machine killing spree, finding solace in the machine village and readjusting her own perspective and taking on 2B's memories, refinding a sort of beauty in this world. 9S, a curious android who, over the course of Route B and CD, learns more about these machines, finding that they have more in common than they had originally assumed, and jaded by the meaninglessness of the war when learning the truth of the Moon server. These androids have gone through this route going in reverse directions, finding themselves at a crossroad atop the tower in a final battle of motivations and ideology. That's what makes endings for Nier Automata impactful, as it acts as a culmination of these emotions, perspectives, and character development. So why talk about the story of 2B, 9S, and A2? It's because the story of Nier Automata is explored from these different perspectives, leading to similar yet different themes that interconnect with each other. From the flawed perfectionism of YorHa forces to the deceptive intelligence of the machines being put front and center, the multi-pronged approach to these themes is unique and makes the game hard to forget. The way Yoko Taro structured Nier Automata is an interesting one. With Route A and Route B being so similar, the story could be said to go from A to Alternative A to B, where B is the second part of the story that we experience in Route CD. This approach helps to fully flesh out different perspectives and tell slight variations of the same story, all to an emotional effect. And much like how most stories develop, the contrast between how a character begins and how they end is always impactful. And in Automata, this feeling is strengthened through the storytelling structure. That being said, there is one final piece of the puzzle that ties all four endings together, and that is the final ending, Ending E, or the so-called true ending. Players get this ending when completing both Ending C and Ending D, and will appear when Pod 042 appears during the credits to request a stop to the data stream. If players choose to ignore the request, the credits continue as normal, but agreeing to the request prompts the beginning of ending E. Remember in Route B when I talked about the pod conversations that would happen in between chapters? These same pod conversations continue throughout Route CD, both in the same format that we saw in Route B, but also through other means, like talking through the boot-up screen or through the system interface, consistently making checkups on both A2 and 9S, colluding to lead them away from each other and to monitor 9S's degrading mental state. Over the course of this journey with all androids, Pod 042 and Pod 153 have been in frequent contact with each other, starting as information exchanges to benefit both 9S and 2B during routes A and B. With the escalation of the story in routes C and D, this exchange has become an active plan to draw on the abilities of each respective android without any conflict. During the data freeze at the beginning of Route E, Pod 042 questions this motivation, wondering if it's possible that their pod-based intelligence had grown self-aware, to care for these androids in front of them. Despite some initial protests from Pod 153, the two decide to try and save these androids, even if they may go through the same cycle once more. Fighting through waves of data and literally fighting the different names in the credits, the pods are able to break through, repairing all three androids and utilizing other pods to set them back up, hinting at the cycle beginning anew for the trio once more. As they lead the androids back to the city, Pod 153 questions Pod 042, asking if the ending will change at all, to which Pod 042 asserts that, while it may stay the same, therein exists the possibility for it to change. This existentialism of these androids in this world is something that really hits home by the very end of Ending E, but is also quite present throughout the rest of the game. We've already talked about the machines, trying to learn and advance their circuitry to improve themselves. We see the androids fighting for a human god that no longer exists, yet they persist in their war against the machines. Many characters across the machine and android spectrum struggle to deal with their own purpose, with each boss having more nuanced motivations than just the destruction of androids, and similarly for the members of the Resistance who have other reasons to keep fighting. This is what makes the many different layers of Nier Automata story so intriguing, because it paints the motivations of different characters and factions so very differently, and challenges the way we see these characters. It presents us a surface level of these characters in Route A and demonstrates how their motivations evolve, and this depth does not only exist in our protagonists, but our antagonists and the side characters that populate this world. There is one particular point on as existentialism that I have not touched on yet, and that is on the characters of Devila, Popula, and Anemone. These androids represent part of the Resistance, a crew of various androids from a pre-YorHa era that fight the machines directly on Earth. As I mentioned earlier, it is throughout these routes that we get to learn more about the Resistance, but particularly these three characters are named, yet not necessarily put to the front line in terms of characterization. In particular, Devila and Popula do not make their debut until routes C and D, when 9S initially wakes up in the Resistance camp following his encounter with A2. Anemone also is much more of a background character, with interactions with 9S and 2B being sparse, though she does show a friendlier attitude to A2. For those who have played the previous title, Nier Replicant, or its older and simpler name Nier, these twins would be familiar to them, but for those who do not, Devila and Popula's place in this world is somewhat shrouded with mystery, with their novel appearing to players right before 9S ascends to the tower. The novel depicts the experiences of these twins before the events of the game, and also their role in Project Gestalt, a long-term project that fits into the long-term lore of this game's universe. What starts as a tale of two observers of a project slowly devolves into a tale of hardships, as these Devila and Popula models have to endure the ire of other androids around them due to the actions that one particular pair of models took. And while much time has passed between these original actions and Nier Automata, a lot of that initial stigma remains for these androids, and this novel is a record of these changes. While originally motivated by their mission to observe Project Gestalt, the resulting discrimination pushed them to take on a different perspective to their lives ahead. When reaching the end of the novel, players are allowed to make a choice between supporting Devila or to touch her cheek. Both choices, while having different dialogue, both point to Popula committing to protecting Devila, showcasing this change of motivations for the two androids. Anemone's novel is found in a different place and can only be found by A2 in the Resistance camp. Similar to the twins, this novel records Anemone's experiences, specifically her experience fighting alongside YorHa forces during the Pearl Harbor descent. Split into 3 different novels, it explores Anemone's changing motivations based on her experiences. Through these novels, we see Anemone struggling with the reason for this continued finding it to be a tough, thankless, and endless war, with her teammates mere remnants of the initial descent operation centuries ago. It is also in these novels we find that Anemone met A2 during this operation, when Project YorHa was still in its infancy and A2 was only called Number 2. Between fighting machines and the logic virus infecting several teammates, Anemone is further confronted by the mental toll of this war, and the comrades that she has had to put down, with her admitting that her heart aches, despite her not having one. And when she emerges as the only survivor of the attack on Mount Kaala, she is further thrown into despair, out of survivor's guilt but also losing her own will to keep going. Marking herself as a coward who did not join her comrades in their final attack and in death, she decides that, since she cannot kill herself, she will continue to bear their will, with a renewed motivation to fight the machines. Unlike how these novels were used to reveal the thoughts of characters like Simone and 9S in Route B, these novels are instead records of Devila, Popula, and Anemone's prior experiences, but still crucially gives us a look into their thoughts and feelings. It gives us further insight into their motivations, with it giving more depth to these characters than the machine themselves. By the end of the game, we realize that there has been one constant theme from Route A all the way to Route E's ending, which is existentialism and the reason to keep going. It fleshes out the characters as more than mindless grunts, placing these characters in a much more gray area than simple black and white. Throughout Route B, we get a sense of this gray area with 9S's revelations and through the various machine interactions. Yet it is these final novels in Route C and D that further push upon that point, showcasing a need to find the motivation to keep on going when all hope seemed lost. The structures and layers of Nier Automata work so well with this theme, developing these characters from one route to the next to have more emotional depth, even the side characters and side missions. With each route, we learn more about these different factions and individual characters, witnessing these characters grapple with what it means to live and to craft new goals for oneself in the absence of any. And by the very end of Route E, when all the dust has settled, Pod 042 asks the final, most important question in Automata, which is whether or not to sacrifice your own save file to support players during the final credits fight sequence. While you could choose not to, choosing to do so will truly wipe the entirety of your save file, with the screen slowly erasing everything in the menus, your weapons, your collected data, everything, till all that is left is pure white and the one final opening screen. An infinite black ocean with a single glowing white sword. As Pod 042 so puts it in the final moments of Route E, the cycle always begins anew, regardless of whether the future will change. For the androids and machines, this is a cycle of war, fighting through 14 different iterations before something truly changes. For YorHa androids, this means fighting endlessly on this Earth while discovering their own motivations for fighting outside of the moon server. For machines like Simone, Adam, and Eve, this means battling against their so-called destiny as machines of war, electing to chase a new path that they have never dared to chase before. So why are the layers of Automata good? It's because the cycle we track from the beginning to the end is so special, from knowing nothing of the world and fighting all we see, to understanding these characters on a deeper level and realizing that it isn't really good versus bad. Automata's journey and structure makes the story have more depth, and makes it an unforgettable story experience with this world of games.